Welcome to Ag Tech Talk by Agribusiness Global, where we explore the cutting-edge technologies and global crop protection industry. I'm your host, Lauren Milligan, content specialist for Agribusiness Global. So today we're joined by Jennifer Goldston, who's the founder and CEO of AgTech PR. We'll be exploring how ag tech companies can better communicate their value alongside traditional inputs like agrochemicals and biologicals, all while building trust across the value chain and navigating some regulatory complexities. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, Jennifer.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to started off with my first question. When it comes to working alongside traditional crop inputs, like I mentioned, like chemicals and biologicals, how do you think ag tech companies can better explain their value and build trust across the industry?
It's a really important question. I guess one thing that maybe I should start with is just explaining what AgTech PR is and how we think about communications in the industry with the ag tech companies that we work with. So I spent my career in agriculture and food in communication roles, a variety of different communication roles. And, over the last, I would say 10 or so years, there's been a consistency in message, I think, across our industry. Everybody is focused on improving productivity, sustainability, and on-farm profitability. There are a lot of options out there for growers to be able to use innovation to address any one of those issues and, typically all three at once. But that also creates some confusion in the marketplace. And so, when you have new innovation that is trying to break through and be relevant to growers, one of the most important things that we've found is, first, you have to really understand where your innovation fits into the total solution. Really, no one product or one company is going to make them or solve, I should say, these issues around productivity, sustainability, and profitability. So understanding where you fit in the total marketplace. And then the key then to building trust is having the data. So data is really key to being very transparent about how your product delivers results in the field. And typically we're seeing a minimum of 3 years of field data to be able to show consistent results. If you have more than that, great. But it's really important to be able to communicate what your product does and then have the supporting data and then how it fits in the market.
Speaking of data, we know ag tech generates a lot of good data revolving around soil health and sustainability metrics and carbon tracking specifically, but turning that into business value isn't always easy. Can I ask where you see the biggest communication gaps when it comes to getting that message across the input providers and growers?
The old adage of you only get one shot, I think, is really true here. And so the biggest communication challenge that we have found is making sure that you're ready. So again, in many cases with ag tech startups, they, have their product concept, they have some investment dollars, they're ready to go out and sell the product. But they really need to make sure that they have a solid data packet. They've got a very clear use case and examples of how their product works in the field. And then make sure that when you pull the trigger and you're out in the market, that you've got a very clear understanding of who your target audience is, what value you're offering to them, and how you can differentiate your message. So any more yield benefits are table stakes. Everything needs to have a positive yield improvement. So beyond that, what are the benefits and the value that the product is offering, both input providers or growers or whoever your target customer is? What we've found is often that value message gets really watered down because there's a lack of clarity around how your product is differentiated and the benefits that you're seeing.
How would you suggest companies would go about making sure that their messages are exactly clear? Would it be working with a company such as yourself, maybe a solid PR company that would offer some suggestions?
Sure. So, one of the things that we've found is that, many of the startup ideas, ad tech ideas come from some really brilliant scientists and engineers solving problems that are very complex. Agriculture, I would say today is more complex than it's ever been before. And we have to give growers a lot of credit because they wear so many hats. Not only do you have to be an agronomist, but you also have to be a data scientist and potentially a mechanic and a technologist and all the things, right?
Yeah.
So as agriculture has gotten more complex, what has been really important is to be able to translate that complexity into simple messaging. And it doesn't have to be hard to do that, but it does take some thoughtfulness and some planning. And, we've held, day-long workshops, and everybody in the room is, a PhD of some kind or very skilled at what they do. And it's been a lot of fun to just then push on, okay, but why? Continuing to ask why or how so that you can get to the very basics of how things work and how to understand the data behind the results that you're communicating. Certainly, we do a lot of that work at AgTech PR, but, anybody that is talking with a grower customer or a input provider really has to be able to understand and articulate what they do. I'll give you a great example. One of our clients that we've had the privilege of working with for many years is a company called Power Pollen. And they have a very unique and complex technology, but they have come up with these really creative anecdotes on how they communicate what their innovation does. For instance, they'll talk about, a thimble full of pollen can pollinate, X amount of acres of corn. And just, being able to talk about a thimble of pollen, you instantly get a visual of what they're talking about. And you've got this small scale with this large scale impact. So I would just, encourage people as you're thinking about your innovation, are there anecdotes? Are there stories? Are there unique ways that you can talk about how your innovation works? And really importantly is if you can walk the field with your growers and bring their stories to life, how they're using it, the results that they're seeing, that is gold right there.
Now, with regulations getting more complex around the world, how are ag tech companies positioning themselves in a way that can connect with regulators? And more specifically, are there any lessons traditional input companies might be able to take from that?
So you're correct. The regulatory system globally continues to be complex. I don't think that that's necessarily new, but it has been a challenge for, many years. One of the things I think to think about is that regulators are another key important stakeholder and when you're thinking about your communications strategy, all your stakeholders are really important, but understanding the needs and the perspectives of each one is a worthy exercise. So when you think about regulators, there's really a couple of different ways that you would communicate with them. One is direct, obviously, but the other is all the surround sound that you're building about your company and your process and your innovation and your data. So any media coverage, any speaking engagement, your social media, all the tools that you have in your toolbox really need to have a consistent message across, and think about all of those pieces together being part of the communications packet that you're using with any of your stakeholders, but also regulators. I will say there's kind of two things that we're noticing. The first is that, the typical regulatory cycle can last, 8 to 10 years. For those startups who have an innovation that's going to require regulatory approval, the challenge is how do they survive that long before they're able to be commercial? So, understanding where the regulatory process fits in your go-to-market strategy is really important. And it may mean that you need some creativity around your go-to-market so that you can survive or find alternatives to that. The other thing we're noticing is a lot of innovation that's coming forward in the market does not require regulatory approval. And so, that innovation is very attractive to crop protection companies who are thinking about how do they navigate some of their crop protection solutions that are regulated. Are there combinations or stacks or other ways that they can continue to make their technology valuable in the marketplace? Or are there opportunities for them to, acquire or partner with non-regulated innovation that's coming into the marketplace?
And now, as we're seeing a lot more collaboration between chemists and technology, we're seeing some digital tools tied to crop protection. We're seeing biologicals linked to precision ag platforms. From your perspective, what makes those partnerships works in the eyes of people like investors and regulators and consumers and even growers?
Years, I think we've heard the story of, a grower having a closet full of data. And, digital tools have been providing a lot of value, but the challenge has been, okay, now that I've captured all this data, what do I do with it? And so, the collaborations between chemistries or crop protection products and digital tools is really important because I think we're finally getting to the point where we can synthesize big data and make it actionable. And that's where the real value is coming to bear. Having actual actionable results for specific products helps the grower to fine tune their strategy for managing their farm operations, and as well as helps to clarify, again, where the data is providing the most value. When you're thinking about, though, beyond farmers, investors and regulators and even consumers, the other thing that the digital tools allows us to do is have greater levels of transparency. And consumers are having a bigger voice in where their food comes from and how it is being produced. And so being able to use these new tools for transparency is very attractive and really puts farmers, again, as the heroes of the food system so that they can show not only this wonderful food that they've produced, but how they did it. And I think that is really important and an exciting part of our future. These digital tools are only going to get better as we continue to integrate AI and other new technologies into, our crop production system. So it's a very exciting time.
Definitely. For my last question, looking ahead to the future, how important will strategic communication be in making sure new technologies aren't seen as kind of standalone tools, but actually integrated solutions into the market?
So one of the things I said in the beginning is that often what we see is once you have a proven innovation and you're able to get some money to be able to grow your business, the third leg of that stool is the ability to tell your story. And strategic communications really comes down to that. How are you telling your story? And while agriculture continues to get more complex, technology is continuing to get more complex, our storytelling ability can't be. And so, thinking that through and making sure that it's an important part of your go-to-market approach is critical to being successful in the market. We as an industry, I think, have had some incredible successes and failures in communicating technology. But what we're seeing with a lot of consumer insight studies is that consumers were more knowledgeable and more interested in how their food is grown than ever before. And so our ability to communicate with them, even if, they're farther downstream, our ability to communicate with them and to tell the story of agriculture and to share the excitement of all the innovation that's coming to bear is critical. And, everybody who works in ag, I think, has a calling. Part of what we do is build things, and that's really exciting, but we're doing it for a noble mission. And so inherent in that, I think, is also being an ambassador for the industry, an ambassador for growers, and telling the exciting story of technology to anyone and everyone who wants to hear it.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, Laura, I think, these are really important questions and sometimes often overlooked. So I just really want to thank you for putting the spotlight on the need for strategic communications. And it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. And there's a lot of great innovation that's coming to bear. So, the next 4 or 5 years are going to be, I think, better than we've seen in previous years. And, for those that are on the front lines, creating and building new innovation, keep going because we need you. And to all those growers out there, it's really important that the work that they're doing to help feed the world.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us, Jennifer. This has been a really great conversation.
Thank you, Lauren. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Ag Tech Talk by Agribusiness Global. Stay connected with the latest in ag tech and crop protection by following us on LinkedIn and visiting agrobusinessglobal.com for more insights and updates. Until next time.